Johnson. I'm the Director of Membership and Events at the Portland Regional Chamber. Thank you for joining me today for our first virtual Kegs and Issues of the 2020-21 event season. We continue to deliver our signature events virtually, so please do be sure to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on social media to be kept up to date. Visit portlandregion.com for more details and to register. We have an amazing presentation for you tonight. We're going to take on the topic of racial and social justice with the Boston Celtics and the Maine Red Claws. But first, I want to take a moment to thank all of our generous sponsors of this program who makes Kegs and Issues possible, whether in person or virtual. Our presenting sponsors, cPort Credit Union, WEX, Consolidated Communications, and tonight's featured sponsor, Baker Newman Noyes. Now, normally the first round of drinks would be on them, so hopefully you've brought your favorite beverage with you for tonight's presentation. Our cooperating sponsors are Modern Woodman, Moody's Collision Center, Mindful Employer, and Maine Mortgage Solutions. Our reception sponsors, Portland Beer Hub, the Maine Brew Bus, Vacation Land Distributors, and Rivalries. And I'd also like to recognize our craft brewery, distillery, and winery members. Without them and their commitment, this event would not be what it is today. Our media partners, Town Square Media, Maine Magazine, WCSH News Center Maine, and Maine Biz. I'd also like to thank the Portland Regional Chamber of Commerce's special community partners, Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield, Spectrum Healthcare, University of Southern Maine, Southern Maine Community College, and our newest special community partner, MEMIC. And also a big shout out to Aura, our typical host for this event. We cannot wait to be back live with you as soon as possible. Now, as we do on all of our Kegs and Issues events, I'd like to welcome one of our presenting sponsors to your screen to kick off the event. Please welcome Baker Newman Noyes Managing Principal, Dayton Benway.
Thank you, Tommy. Good afternoon. My name is Dayton Benway, and I'm the Managing Principal of Baker Newman Noyes. So you may have heard me say this a few times before, but it never hurts to remind everyone that with all of the 3 and 4 name firms in the area, we are in fact the cool kids in town. We are the CPAs. And we are thrilled to be back for our 3rd season as a presenting sponsor of Kegs and Issues. Now, the last time I joined you guys, the world was a very different place. And since then, we've endured a COVID-19 pandemic that has swept across the world and really impacted our lives in almost every way possible. Even after all 5 of the BNN offices were closed and our 300 employees began working remotely last March, we never took our eye off our exceptionally responsive client service. At the same time, our focus on caring for others and supporting our communities was as strong as ever because let's face it, we need it as much as ever right now. So whether we were partnering with the United Way of Greater Portland to improve early childhood education as part of the Thrive 2027 Goal 1, or donating laptops to Ruth's Reusables so they could help children who would head to work or who had to go to school remotely, but didn't have sufficient devices, we are proud to be part of the Greater Portland business community who knows how to do the right thing. Over the summer, the injustice and the inequality that exists in our nation was highlighted after the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others. We have a long way to go to remove the unintended racial bias from our society and achieve fair inclusion. Every step forward is really important. For BNN, becoming a founding member of the Racial Justice Fund was a good first step. When we joined the Chamber and other Portland businesses to stand together in solidarity against racial and social injustice, that was another good step. And when we participated in the 21-day Racial Equality Challenge, that was one more good step. And even though we've taken those steps, we cannot stop there. Like many of you, I've paused during the past several months to learn and to grow. And while my journey just recently began, I've already learned that I have so much more to learn. It is for that reason that I was thrilled by the opportunity for BNN to be the presenting sponsor of this Kegs and Issues, where we would be allowed to learn how the Boston Celtics and their Shamrock Foundation have committed to address the racial injustice and social inequalities. Whether we're working to suppress COVID-19 or peacefully stand against racism, we must do it together because it is only by working together that our communities will ever truly win as a team. I'm really looking forward to spending the next hour listening, learning, and growing with you. Tommy and Quincy, thank you for hosting such a timely, important conversation. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, Dayton, and thanks to the entire team at Baker Newman Noyes. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Dave Hoffman is the Boston Celtics Vice President of Community Engagement and the Boston Celtics Shamrock Foundation, consistently one of the top-ranking teams in the NBA in regards to the scope and scale of the outreach. Dave and the team are responsible for fundraising and operating a $2 million budget that resources 40-plus programs in the team's charitable arm, the Boston Celtics Shamrock Foundation. Eubanks is the president of our own Maine Red Claws and the vice president of the Boston Celtics. Before joining the team, Dajuan worked in experiential marketing industry for 13-plus years with several leading agencies. Dajuan is also a former player and goodwill ambassador of the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters, where he had the opportunity to perform all around the world. Now, their collective vision is that every company and institution has a unique blend of assets to leverage to address systemic racial inequities. As a professional basketball team or teams, we have a unique blend of resources to leverage, but you do too. We want to pull the curtain back a bit on our process that led to identifying our direction in hopes that it can help serve as a resource for our member businesses and organizations to cultivate your own process that is unique to you, because we all have a role to play in this fight. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dave Hoffman and Dajuan Eubanks. Now, I'm really excited to have both of you guys here talking about this particular topic. The Chamber has recently been putting a lot of focus on racial and social equity and trying to help our member businesses navigate this conversation in their own workplaces. The Boston Celtics have put a lot of resources, time, and energy into this topic, as well as our hope today is to learn from your efforts and find ways that our members can take pieces of your process and implement them at their own organizations. So let's get started. The Boston Celtics, and by extension, the Maine Red Claws, have embarked on a 10-year, $25 million commitment named the Boston Celtics United for Social Justice that's aimed to address racial injustice and social inequities. How did this come to be?
Good afternoon, Tommy. Are you able to see me? I'm just trying to wait for the prompt here, but
Yep.
Am I on?
You're on. I can hear you.
Okay, all right. There we go. Well, thank you for having us on. It's a pleasure to support the Chamber in their efforts, in particular dealing with social injustice in that way. But the question you mentioned out of the gate there is, how did this come about? As we all know, there are many issues causing racial inequality and social injustice, but for our organization, as we began to look into the research around not only the Boston market, but surrounding towns in New England itself, these 6 individual pillars rose to the top for us, because we felt as though we had the tools and resources to really begin to tackle some of the issues that may exist in this area. And so it was important to us to identify the 6 that we're going to be talking about today. And as we were looking to identify those 6, as you see in the slides coming up here next, there were 3 questions that we ended up facilitating as we were exploring these 6 areas. And so if you want to move to the next slide. So the first area being equity and education, second being economic opportunity and empowerment, the third being equality in healthcare, equity in healthcare, fourth being breaking down barriers and building bridges, the fifth being criminal justice and law enforcement, and the sixth being voting and civic engagement. And as mentioned before, for us as an organization, we really wanted to make sure that we were able to identify areas in which we felt the tools and assets we had would be viable to really try to make it and have impact in these areas. And so those 3 questions that I mentioned that we utilized to try to qualify these 6 pillars were simply, one being, what are the key issues causing racial inequity in these areas? 2, what are the statistics and data supporting those conclusions? And 3, ultimately, what are some solutions for us to potentially implement as an organization to tackle those root causes? And so a lot of work has been done in a short amount of time to really explore and qualify these areas. And as we as an organization explore with talent from both our ownership group on down to our players, as we began looking into these areas more deeply, we have also found that as you explore these 6 areas, they also somewhat tie together, and so as we speak here to this evening regarding the pillars in general, you'll see that there are some commonalities that we have across the board that we too are still learning to apply.
Thanks, Dajuan. Dave, anything following else on that?
No, thanks everyone for having me. This is by far the easiest commute I've had from Boston to Portland ever. So this was certainly time well spent, even if I had to hop in the car. I think the purpose of this presentation today, I think hopefully is to inspire you all to look at what your assets are. You all are representing some combination of companies, corporations, institutions, or at the very least, families, heads of households, and members of your neighborhood. And so, at every one of those associations, you have assets to leverage. And so we're gonna pull the curtain back, as Tommy stated earlier, on what our process was, and that the purpose of us pulling the curtain back is not to say we have the answers. It's to hopefully help contextualize and inspire you all to go through some similar exercise if you're struggling, if you're motivated to make an impact here. Do your part, leverage your platform to drive social equity, especially along racial lines, but you don't know where to get started. You are in great company. And despite our heritage as an organization with pioneering stuff like the first Black starting 5 in NBA history, or the first Black coach in Bill Russell in North American professional sports, or the first Black player drafted in 1950 in Chuck Cooper, that collectively, we all need to understand that we need to rise to the occasion, just like others did in our collective histories, right? And so in order to do that, you have to have the courage to try, and it is totally okay to not have the answers. It's about the process, right? And so hopefully today will give you some semblance of security if you're looking for it, in that it's okay to not know. It's about the exploration, it's about the exercise, and then the residual value that you're going to get along the way for your employee bases, you individually, is a ton of growth as well. In comfort in discussing these issues, in hearing other people's experiences, and so there's so many different residual kind of pieces of value that will come along that, and hopefully at the end of the tunnel, you'll also identify some ways that you can contribute, to this movement societally, because society is an accumulation of all of us as individuals and the institutions that we're associated with. And so if we can all collectively leverage those individual powers and those institutional powers, I think it'll be a big inflection point for our country when it comes to racial justice in particular. So thanks for having me, and I know we'll walk you through that process a little bit, but I'll turn it back over to Tommy.
So thanks, Dave. And so these focus areas, let's dig a little deeper. They were identified through pretty extensive discussions with members of the Celtics organization. That included players, owners, coaches, the front office staff, but it also included a wide variety of leaders in the community, like civic organizations, government, academia, social justice. Tell us a little bit of how that process went.
Yeah. So if we move on to the next slide here, you'll be able to see, as Dave and I came together, pulling together this presentation in itself, we kind of reflected upon what it was for us over the last several months in that sense. And as you can see, we've laid out a chart here for you, just kind of basically taking you through the steps of what our process ended up unfolding as. And so, like everyone else back in May of this year, I think we all were traumatized by what we saw on video with the George Floyd incident, and for those of you that may have spoken to me in the community, I think you've heard me say often that, although it was rooted in race, the deeper conversation there was humanity, and so as an organization, we were very fortunate. And what I mean by being fortunate is that from the top on down to the bottom, we were in a position to make a decision, and our leadership came forth right away and determined that this was an issue that we were going to be a part of, and if you heard Dave mention earlier, we have a steep history when it comes down to, racial inequality and things of that nature, in particular dealing with the 40s, 50s, and 60s with the sport that we're in. But this was time for our organization once again to be able to step up and just really deal with what was going on in the world today. And so from that moment, recognizing that it was, we needed to humanize it was the first step, and within that first step, determining that we were going to have a voice within it was the next thing. And so it's as we all know, this is a subject matter that sometimes is very uncomfortable individually, let alone as a corporation in that way. And so we were fortunate to have our organization determine that we're going to step out and make a statement on this. And when we stepped out and made a statement on it, it was from a human voice. We're all human. And as Dave mentioned, we have assets, and each one of us are assets to our company. And during that moment in time in May of this year, to be able to go on with business as usual and not address what was happening in the media at the time was not something we wanted to have take place. And so in order to do that, we wanted to make sure our employees understood that we know that there's something going on, in the organization. And from that, we were able to design a town hall, which some of you may have done within your own organizations as well. But we quickly jumped on that and was very fortunate to have the assets of the NBA also work with us. Our town hall was moderated by a D&I representative from the NBA itself, and we included a panel of 6 individuals, both internal and external, to just discuss company-wide what was going on at that time. And that discussion was rooted in just reality. It wasn't something where we were just trying to address it and sweep it under the carpet. It was really raw, and it was really dealing with what was on our minds at the time, and that was everyone. And to have our ownership group, Rick Grossbeck, step up and say to him that this really matters, really set the tone for us when we began our process, because we knew from the top down that everyone was invested and it was okay to be invested. And, as we created this human effect, it was also important to have safe spaces, and really being able to cultivate an environment that support vulnerability and being able to have conversations and uncomfortable conversations amongst all staff. And so from there, we were able to continue on, and we ended up doing a series of roundtables in which we understood that education was the next best step. Now we have people talking about it in a genuine way. We needed to continue on that momentum and create that educative background or environment to be able to support what was going on. And so through that, in the roundtables, we were able to assemble with our senior management team led by Dave and others to gather some articles, movies, books, and things just to provide some content for our organization to begin to delve into. And then throughout that roundtable process, we also realized it was an opportunity to provide leadership for those in the organization to be able to step up and show that they wanted to be a part of this societal change and help lead our organization through this. And so through those two portions there was really, it was a quick exercise, but it was a needed exercise, and really getting everybody to a place of understanding where we wanted to be since we had made the decision to be a part of this. And then that in itself led to what we all, I think, are looking for is the inspiration, and because we were able to cultivate this internally with the help of some outside sources and things of that nature, but because we were able to institute this inside the walls of the Celtics organization, we took that to leverage discussion to inspire participation beyond just, all right, let's not just learn about it, let's also dive into it and figure out how we may be able to tie it into these 6 pillars that we've unveiled in that way. And so, our process is one where it worked for us in our application, but this is also a process I believe everyone within their own organization can do. And what I'll do from here is allow Dave to step in from the design and implementation standpoint. But one of the things that I am very thankful for from a Maine Red Claws perspective in particular is the fact that, we were acquired by the Boston Celtics and given the opportunity to participate at a level and utilize resources and means to be able to do something like this. And so to be able to work alongside of Dave, and this is one of Dave's sweet spots. I mean, it's been nice and very very cool to work within an organization that's allowing employees to address and drive initiatives that are so important to our society and our world. So Dave, I'll kind of turn it over to you from here.
Yeah, thanks, Dajuan. So I think just to take a step back before I get into some of the design stuff, and then I'll talk about implementation as well. The Boston Celtics are a global brand, by extension. Red Claws are part of the family. And we have, 5-6 million followers on Instagram. We have, 4 or 5, million followers on Twitter. We have a huge Facebook platform. We have our marketing, partners and our broadcast partners and all those things. And so I think, sometimes the instincts are, make a statement, put it out on your social channels, because that's where you're going to have the largest reach. And that's important, of course, because you want to make sure that the world knows where you stand on this. Because I think increasingly 2020 has really made people pick a side. But in order to actually, inspire change, in order to be a catalyst for change, you have to look internally first, right? And so that's why we started at the human level. That's why we started with, hey, everyone that wears this brand, whether you're on the court or whether you're coaching people on the court or whether you're behind the scenes, your human experiences and your perspectives are going to help drive this. That's why we started at such a fundamental level, and really built a really strong foundation for people to feel like they're a part of it, and a sense of pride and ownership in it, in the process of it, which ultimately I think allows for a richer experience for them and a richer output as far as impact goes. So picking up on kind of this slide at the design phase, right? So after we've, kind of given the space for our members of our organization to share personal experiences, get their thought, challenged, get their antenna raised a little bit, getting people to understand that you can't sit on the sideline, whether you're someone that looks like me, that has unearned privilege based on my skin color, understanding your role in it, or whether you're someone that looks like Dajuan, or whether you're someone that looks like neither one of us, that we all have this role to play in it. And so that was really critical. And as we looked at the design, we achieved a level of inspiration and motivation to kind of really get our hands dirty and roll up our sleeves on these issues. But we needed to make sure that we approached the design portion of this with the proper amount of humility. And so what we did was we interviewed players, coaches, front office staff, everyone kind of in our wheelhouse with, after all this exploration on those 3 stages before design, what are some of the areas that are the stickiest for you as far as your passion? And if we were going to devote a tremendous amount of resources and time towards this for many, many years, hopefully in perpetuity, or hopefully we don't need to in perpetuity because we've alleviated these social inequities. But if we're going to kind of devote all this kind of time, energy, and resources towards it, what areas would that be? Based on all these conversations that we've had, based on the education that we've gotten, based on the content that we've consumed, based on all that stuff. And so we identified these 6 really broad brushstroke areas that Dajuan alluded to earlier on the previous slide. And the really interesting thing about those areas is that there's so much connective tissue that exists between them. So it's really impossible to talk about inequities in education without talking about criminal justice and law enforcement. It's really hard to talk about criminal justice and law enforcement without talking about inequities in health. And therefore voting and civic engagement, and who we put in office, and where the policies are, and where the advocacy comes from, and where the resources are, and all that stuff. And so that was one of the kind of more fascinating parts of the progression, was, really how hard it is to differentiate when you go all the way down into the root cause stage of all this stuff. As we went to design it, we got these broad brushstroke areas, and then we looked to find people that we would deem experts in each of these areas. So if we're talking about criminal justice and law enforcement, who are the members of the academic world? We're at an academic hub here in Boston. Let's leverage that. That's an asset for us, right, that we can leverage with our connections to all these great colleges and universities. So who can we tap into there that can provide us with, the kind of data-driven kind of root causes of a lot of this stuff as they've conducted research for their entire careers. Other members of the nonprofit sector, some people in elected positions, and so on and so forth. And so let's interview those folks. Let's get all these key problems and root causes, and then let's map those back. Actually, if you can kick back to the other slide, I'll get to this slide in a second. Daniel, thank you. So once we identify those key problems and root causes and the data that supports it coming from the true experts, not a professional basketball team who's motivated and trying to do right, but not experts, then let's map what we already do against that. Let's look at the programs that we already run. Let's look at our policies internally. Let's look at everything under the hood that makes us the Boston Celtics or the Red Claws from a policy, procedure, operational, or output standpoint against those root causes, and see what are the low-hanging fruit things that we can change right away. But let's also not be scared of the things that are really high impact that might be much more difficult to be able to sink our teeth into. And then the implementation phase. So, commit the resources publicly. There's a level of accountability when you talk about something publicly, especially for a brand like the Celtics or a brand like the Red Claws. And so when you make the statement, it's great. Hopefully it inspires other companies, organizations to kind of keep up in their own way. But additionally, it provides a level of accountability towards actually delivering on what it is you're seeking to deliver on. And then let's go to implement this stuff and measure progress. And so I wanted to just illustrate what that looked like on paper for folks. Again, going back to our objective here, which is not to say the Boston Celtics or the Red Claws have the answers. And in bold letters, we don't. But what we do have is the courage to try, right? And so that's the point of this. And so if you kick into the next slide, I just want to orient you to some of the logistical stuff that kind of manifested itself. So this is a sample for the equity and education work that we're doing. On the left-hand side, key problems and root causes. These are the notes from a lot of the experts and the themes from a lot of the experts, talking about, can you get it all the way down to a systemic level? And so, for example, on there, the 0 to 6 years old for a young person and the access to high quality early education or lack thereof in low income communities, which unfortunately also mirrors along racial lines, communities of color, isn't there. And so there's all types of case studies that we reviewed and data and stats that we reviewed. There was a 30-something year study out of Chicago, University of Chicago, that tracked kids from birth all the way 30-something years. Those people now have kids, and those kids, some of which have kids as well. So you're looking at the multi-generational impact of access to 1 or 2 years of high quality early education. So this was just great information for us to be able to get truly from the experts, right? And we got a whole bunch of them, not just early education, but in access to college and after school programming and mental health counselors in schools to deal with trauma that often exists in communities of color at disproportionate rates, and so on and so forth. And then some stats that went along with it. And then we essentially took our assets and we laid them all out. We rattled them all off. We're a professional basketball team. We have players that are really high profile. We have coaches. We certainly have some dollars to leverage. We have an arena. We have 41 home games a year. We have tickets to games. We have our practice facility. We have our social media following. We have our mascot. We have our investor group. We have the credibility of the brand and the reach. You name it. We rattled it all off. And then we looked at where we could essentially apply those assets on a 2x2 matrix. So on the left-hand side is the x-axis, which is like difficulty to execute or ease to execute based on our assets. And then the y-axis, or other way around rather, X and Y, size of the impact, small to big, and then started plotting out assets and programs and initiatives on this framework. Let's shoot for as many as possible in that lower right-hand corner that are big impact and easy for a place like the Boston Celtics or the Red Claws to execute against. Let's not be scared of the upper right-hand quadrant, which is big impact, really difficult. But let's avoid the really difficult, low impact, or really easy low impact, right? And let's try to put our resources in the right places. So and we did that times 6. We did that in each of these focus areas. And now as we're in the implementation phase, we've assembled committees. We have about 110 Celtic staff members, players, and coaches that are serving on one of these 6 committees or multiple committees. We're only about 150 person organization, believe it or not. We're relatively lean. And so that's tremendous amount of volume of participation. And now we're in the process of identifying with more specificity, specific initiatives and projects to pursue, and then who out there in the nonprofit sector is already doing it that we could collaborate with, and we can bring what our unique assets are to the table, and they'll bring what their unique assets are to the table, which is far more technical know-how and a pedagogical model to leverage to make an impact here. So I'm most proud of our process at this point because we're just getting started on the impact. And hopefully, a year from now, we'll be able to look back and say our process led to more impact than if we didn't go through such a robust process.
Thanks, Dave. A question that I'm dying to ask you. You guys have some really young, up and rising stars in the Celtics organization. Person that comes to mind, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. You guys made it to the 2020 Eastern Conference Finals, which is commendable. But some of these folks are really particularly driven on this topic. Can you talk a little bit about players like Jaylen Brown and how they're making an impact?
You want to take that, Dajuan? You want me to go?
I think you should go with that because you're working with Allison a little bit closer with that. So
yeah, this is the first time in my Celtic tenure that I haven't seen our players in 7 months in person because I was not in the bubble. It's been a little bit of a challenge, but we have, as Dajuan mentioned, our VP of player development, Allison Feaster, who's a former WNBA player, which is probably the least impressive accomplishment of her career. She's really amazing, and she was in the bubble, and so she was really kind of on the front lines of it. Of all the stuff that you saw and a lot of the stuff that you didn't see. I think we're really lucky that we have such incredibly young, talented, thoughtful, educated, humble, driven, and passionate players on our roster. Maybe it's a generational thing. It seems to be generational with the generation that they're in. Where they're looking at societal problems and saying, no, we're not running this back. Like, we're going to make an impact. We're going to put a dent in this. So it's been, as a starting point, you're not trying to teach players on the issues. In fact, we're really doing a whole lot more listening than anything. And so for us to be able to have that is great. And they're, so well-versed in this. Some of our players have lived experiences in this space as people of color, as young people of color, and have story after story. Marcus Smart came out with a Players Tribune article earlier this week, which talked very specifically about several examples he's experienced, including one right outside the Garden on a game night, which is horrifying and jarring to hear. And so, for us, we've done a whole lot of listening, making sure that we're doing whatever we can to remove the roadblocks and obstacles for players. But what a world we're living in now, where players are, really taking the baton from the athlete activists of our previous generations and pushing it forward.
And that's one thing I'll add to what Dave was saying around being fortunate is that we do have players that have a voice and have a presence globally with this. And as an organization, we were able to leverage that right out of the gate, and so everyone bought into it. Even their voice was as loud as our owners in this way. And so it's been great to be able to have that synchrony in place as far as like we're all on the same page from an organizational standpoint, and we're all in it together. And so it's proven to be a strong method.
And the other thing I'll just add on very quickly, Tommy, is just, going back to the humanize. It can sometimes be forgotten that big superstar international, famous basketball players are humans first. And so part of the humanization of all this is our players are people. And so let's tap into that human aspect of it first and foremost. Let's check in on them and make sure they're okay as humans, just like we would anyone else. Let's engage them in the process as humans, just like anybody else.
Thank you, guys. And again, you mentioned the example with Allison, but are there any other examples of other members within the Celtics organization? Maybe they're not stars on the court or former stars that you could think of. Any examples to point to?
Well, I'd like to just give a plug to our ownership group. I mean, for them to be able to step up, and I think if you guys were watching the Bubble Project, you'll see Wick Grossbeck, him and himself just making a statement, Black Lives Matter, as part of the commercial that the NBA used and leveraged as part of their messaging while being in the Bubble Project to bring awareness around Black Lives Matter. And so, to have, once again, buy-in across the board has just been phenomenal. I think it helps our cause and giving us a strong foundation to move forward and really approach and attack this work, because it isn't a short game. We're in this for the long haul, and it's something that hopefully we're going to be able to make an impact on. And as we share our story and begin to engage as well, we'll bring others along, and we can definitely have some sort of impact that's sizable at the end, whatever that might be.
And, for everyone, we all have employees and colleagues, and it's such a tremendous leadership opportunity for staff members that may not always get, all the leadership opportunities for a variety of reasons under normal business circumstances. This is a different side of the brain, and a different set of skills and talents and experiences to leverage here. And so there's been so many incredible people across the organization that have been really passionate about this and have stepped up. And plug for a Red Claws employee. There's a woman that works for the Red Claws who I've been so incredibly impressed with, that lives in the town of Gorham and has driven a whole bunch of change in Gorham well before Celtics United existed. And so to be able, and that type of activism is happening on a human level with employees everywhere. And so I think, for people like that to even further galvanize their relationship with their employer, I think is a wonderful opportunity to leverage as well, and really kind of drawing that connection that people might have to the place that they work is really a powerful tool. And then if anyone's looking for business cases for it, those are vast as well.
Dajuan, I'm glad you brought up the ownership group and some of the Celtics legends and other staff members. This implementation is going to be led by a governing board. Has the board been established, or has it been announced yet? Or, and I guess the second part of that is, have they set any specific strategic objectives?
Right. So I can start this, but I know Dave has a little bit more information regarding it since he's driving this daily. But, as Dave mentioned, this is a work in progress, and we're continuing to develop and evolve our structure within this. And so, as I know, we do have a board that's being shaped and formed, and, that will be announced coming up soon, but this is a developing process for us. Once again, we've done a lot in a short period of time, and we're doing it real time, and so Dave, I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, but.
Yeah, we'll announce the board. It's, a combination of everyone part of our family in some way, shape, or form. So members of our ownership or investor group, by the way, who are, contributing really significantly financially towards this, and always have been really supportive of our philanthropic and community efforts. Also, some former players, some giants. It'll be a great list. And strategically, these people are really well connected, have access to tremendous amount of human resources when it comes to world experts in all these different areas. And we're looking to really tap into that, and we have been already, which has been great. It's an opportunity for that board also to work alongside our committed staff, which I think is valuable on a lot of levels as well.
Excellent, guys. I'm trying to be sensitive to time too, but we got a couple questions that are coming in. Before we get to those, if people do have questions, please do put them in the chat box down in the YouTube box there. But one last thing that as people come to this event, what can they do to take away from some of the things that Celtics are doing to really begin to incorporate them into their own organizations? If there was a magic bullet that you could give for advice, what would that be?
I think it goes back to that initial step in our process was humanizing being one, but more importantly, making the decision. You know, you can't sit on the fence when it comes to issues like this, and you have to really make the decision whether you're in or out, you know, and oftentimes it's hard and challenging as a business to do that. But when you know you're doing the right thing, you know, it's about just having the grit and grind to be able to make the choice and move forward with it, you know. And so if there's anything I would say is that, you know, not being afraid to take on the opportunity and the hopes of having change take place with something that you know is right.
Yeah, I would, you know, it's spot on. I would say, you know, have the courage, you know, to dive in, right? And let the process play out. You know, you don't have to have the answers. I've talked to a lot of people, you know, individually or you know, across different companies and stuff like that. And you know, there's like, you know, understandably so, people are trying to skip to solutions. And I'm just encouraging people, because I really have no insight into solutions yet. I'm just encouraging people to just participate in the process, like have a great process and see where that process leads you. And I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I can humbly give is just establish a process and see what it outputs.
Perfect. Well, we've had a great presentation. So first and foremost, thank you guys both for you know, for all the content. We got a few great questions that are coming in. So I'll start it off with Betsy Emans asked, she'd really like to hear about how we can integrate youth, racial, and social justice programs given the current COVID-19 protocols. She mentioned that True.org started doing this with the community agencies this summer right here in Maine. Dajuan, are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with the True Agency. I do know Betsy as well too. And so, you know, I think this is something where, once again, we all are dealing with the same circumstances right now, where we're having to navigate a pandemic, but also address the social issues such as racial and social injustice in that sense. And so I think that, you know, as time goes on and as we all begin to unveil our plans, and as Dave mentioned, you know, we're in the throes of really beginning to implement the design. You know, we are having these weekly, bi-weekly meetings in our different pillars and really trying to identify organizations that we can come alongside of and support and raise awareness with, and perhaps even create new things with. And so I think it's just a matter of allowing time to evolve and people to find their legs underneath them as to what they want to dive in with, and then really being able to connect the dots that way.
Thanks, Dajuan. Another question came in from Ryan Gordy. He's leading a team through a professional development process around these issues. Is there a way to gain access to these slides as a tool and a resource? And I guess the second question from that is, do you have any advice for him as he looks to lead his team through these issues?
I know Ryan. What's up, Ryan? Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know how you guys would distribute this, but the slides are up there, and maybe you can back up and put it back up, and people can take pictures of it if it's easier. But yeah, that's not, you know, a sensitive document for us. Like I said, we're trying to use our platform here today to just show one way of going about it. You know, maybe you take this and change it to fit your environment, and that would be a wonderful thing for us. That would make us, you know, certainly feel like it was we made some contributions today. But ultimately, you might say, "Hey, that works for the Boston Celtics and the Maine Red Claws, but it's not applicable to us from a process standpoint." But hopefully, you can land somewhere else. And then, in general, any advice? I mean, I think I covered some of the advice already on just, you know, think about your process and then kind of have the courage to go into the process and see what happens. Use your people. Your people will come up with ideas. And the ideas that your people will come up with, they'll have a sense of pride and ownership in. Leverage the experts around you. If you're in a school environment, you might have some experts to leverage. If not, there's colleges and universities around. There's nonprofit institutions everywhere. And if you don't have access to any of these folks, reach out. And if you can't get to them, there's tons of resources online that I'm sure you can find to help develop some of that stuff. But try to ground your exploration with some guardrails on some you know, academic research and other things that allows you to pursue with more conviction, right? So you don't need to kind of wonder, is this the right thing? I don't know. It feels okay. It feels right. But I can't totally say with a ton of conviction because I'm not an expert in this area. if you really rely on the work that other people have been doing for decades, it means that you can like pursue it with a lot more conviction and force, which has a contagious, forgive the 2020 connotation, has a contagious energy to it, when you're saying things with conviction and you're driven.
Thank you, Dave. A couple more questions here, and great questions, great responses. And I do want to let everybody know, by registering for the event today, we'll make the slides that the gentleman from the Celtics provided for us today. That'll be in the document that we send out as a thank you email. So you all get a copy of this moving forward once we send out that email. Next question we have is from Nicole Avery. She says, as a small nonprofit, it can be difficult to do this kind of deep dive work. She'd be interested in talking with other youth serving programs that might be interested in combining forces for this work. So more of a statement than a question, but nice to hear that there are nonprofits out there that are looking to sort of align themselves with other similar organizations for this type of work. We have one more question.
I'd say in the nonprofit sector in general, there's never been a better time, right? 2020 and COVID and the economic components of COVID, there's never been a worse time, probably for nonprofits, as funding may dry up and stuff like that. But like it got flipped a little bit, because there's never been a better time to be in the nonprofit sector. So I would say, if you're not already viewing your work through an equity lens, how do you apply an equity lens to your work and your mission? Many nonprofits are already there to try to course correct societal inequities. But if you don't have an equity lens already, how do you apply one, right? And if you do that, I think there's a whole vast world of corporate, partnerships to be had and philanthropic dollars to be had to further your mission, because a lot of people are looking to try to make an impact here on the equity side.
Got a couple more questions here. We've got one from Chris Farnham from Spurwink. She says that the Red Claws and by extension the Celtics have been really good friends to many organizations here in Maine, including Spurwink. How can we support and amplify the important work that you're doing in this area?
Well, as Dave mentioned, it's a developing process, and what we're looking to do as we get into the implementation stage is that we're going to have ways in which people that are interested in learning more about our planning and aligning themselves alongside of us, you'll be able to submit and also request information in that way. And that's something that's in the works right now, I know, as we speak. And as we continue to move forward and determine whether or not our season is going to take place at what point in time at the beginning of next year, we'll be able to communicate that. But if you have an interest in learning more, just feel free to reach out to us at mainredclaws.com, and we'll be able to connect with you and provide you with the appropriate information at the appropriate time as we develop it there. But we are excited to get this thing out and rolling. And, there have been some efforts already, particularly around the civic and voting pillar that we have here in the community as part of the plan. But as we continue to roll out and we do our due diligence, we're going to be actively looking for organizations to dig dive with as well, too, to see how we can continue to have an impact here in this community as a business partner.
Well, Dajuan, I know the Chamber is going to be leaning heavily upon organizations like the Red Claws and the Celtics, and you yourself has stepped up in the community as you do. The Chamber is very active in tackling this subject, as we mentioned at the top of the hour. So if there's organizations that are listening today that want to get more active, please reach out to the Chamber or reach out directly to the Red Claws or the Celtics. But I want to say thank you again, gentlemen. What a fantastic presentation. We're really fortunate to have you guys here today. If there are further questions, please submit them to the Chamber. We'd be happy to field those as best we can. But again, thank you to everybody for attending today. And again, to stay tuned for what's coming up for next events with the Chamber. Always stay tuned to our portlandregion.com website. But really, big shout out and thank you to you guys for bringing this important topic to light and spending some time on it today. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Nice job, Tommy.